And now it's time for Talking Trade with Sandi Siegel and Ken Wasylik, sponsored by the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity, Michael Best Strategies, and Carroll University.
Welcome. I'm Jeff Maris from WisPolitics.com and WisBusiness.com. Those are nonpartisan news services based in Madison. And we're here to do a special episode of Talking Trade. Talking Trade is a online virtual podcast that we do. And Ken and Sandi are the hosts of that, and you can view that at WisBusiness.com, or you can just Google Talking Trade Podcast. So I want to thank the Carroll University staff for hosting us today and providing this wonderful space. Thank you to Tim, of course, for helping to make that happen. Also want to thank our sponsors of this event, who are also sponsors of Talking Trade. Carroll University, the Center for East Asian Studies at UW-Madison, the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity, thank you, Buckley, and Michael Best Strategies. So why are we doing this? Well, the timing seems to be good, right? Tariffs are on the minds of everybody in the world, really. Anybody involved in business, any consumer. And Wisconsin's an export economy. So when we talk about tariffs and possible trade wars, well, that's pretty serious business. And Wisconsin exports by country. The 2024 ranking, number 1 is Canada, number 2 is Mexico, number 3 is China, number 4 is Germany. So I think that tells you why we might want to talk about tariffs and trade at this moment. So we have an all-star panel here today, and I'm going to call on each of them to introduce themselves and to tell you what they do in this crazy world of trade. First, Sandi Siegel.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. So I'm president of ME Day, and ME Day is a customs broker and freight forwarder. So we are helping our customers both import and export their goods. We're on the import side, we're assessing the duties, the tariffs, etc., getting them through all the regulatory fun and documentation and so forth. So my background is in trade compliance. I'm a licensed customs broker, so I've been doing this for decades, trained on duty assessment and so forth. So as you can imagine, we are quite busy and popular lately, and working hard to work with our clients who are obviously impacted by all of these changes in trade and so forth. So we'll talk about that in detail today.
Yeah, thanks, Sandi. I'm Ken Wasylik, Managing Director of E.M. Wasylik and Associates. We're an international business consulting and developing company. And so we work with U.S. companies finding markets outside. So exports of U.S. products and services, but we also work with non-U.S. companies that have established their business here in North America, so on the import side. So definitely involved with trade. Everybody's talking about trade and tariffs and what's their effect and how's it going to affect business. Where Sandi comes from the customs and freight forwarding basis. I'm going to come from a view of your average family-owned exporter, Wisconsin-based company, and how they're reacting to what's going on with the trade situations today.
Thank you. Tim Sullivan. I'm the current Dean of the School of Business and Technology here at Carroll University. I'm a Carroll grad, a proud Carroll grad. Prior to my assignment here at Carroll, I ran 2 corporations here in southeastern Wisconsin. Bucyrus International. For about 35 years, I was associated with that company. We took it public in 2004. And Rev Group, which still exists here in Brookfield, headquartered in Brookfield, it was basically a culmination of bringing several specialty vehicle companies together. Under both of those assignments as CEO, I weathered through and managed through tariff situations. One other, little tidbit of information that is pertinent, I did advise Governor Scott Walker during his administration as governor of the state of Wisconsin.
I'm Alexandra Sielaff, Associate Professor of Business here at Carroll University. I've been in education for 34 years. I've never known students to be so alert in an economics class. And we just finished our tariff chapters and a lot of questions. We go into Wall Street Journal almost every class, and you are very curious. So this is a great opportunity to ask your questions and try and make sense of the turmoil and all of the events that are happening daily, hourly, and also get some extra credit for being here.
Okay, so Alexandra and Tim, you can share a mic, and then Ken and Sandy can share a mic. Okay, let's just start for the group. Okay, it's a dizzying pace that these threats, the orders, the tariff orders, the changes, I'm supposed to keep up on the news, and I can barely do it. And so, Sandy, you're in the middle of it. What are you telling your customers when they say, "What's going on?" It's like, how do you even prioritize what's going on?
A little more challenging than usual. We, in general, try to keep our customers informed. We do a weekly supply chain update, it's called, and we shoot that out to our customers. We're really active on social media. It's on our website, etc. In the normal environment, once a week is enough on things that are out there pending and so forth. It's been overwhelming in this environment to keep people updated, and we were doing individual blasts, and it was just too much. To your point, the noise and the chaos, and as it started to unfold, we created a landing page on our website that's just called the Trump tariffs, and you're welcome to find it. And it's just trying to keep it really simple with bullet points of this. As of this date, this is in effect, and all the things that have happened versus the things that are proposed or being talked about. So just trying to separate the noise, if you will, from the reality. But that said, there have been days that it has changed, overnight. And there was one day in particular, it changed 4 times in one day, and we're, just trying to keep that and keep it all on that landing page. The way this administration has been sharing the news is a little bit different, and on historical, there's things going out on tweets and on X, and then it's not official. There's been a couple of the tariff changes that have actually happened that were on X, but it was nothing happens in our industry or U.S. Customs till the executive order is issued and a formal message to the customs system. And there were times that it was within 24 hours of the actual change happening, and programmers couldn't keep up. And so it's been very rapid and a bit chaotic in trying to keep up. To answer your question, I guess the answer is we're doing the best we can. And again, just really trying to separate here's where it is today, and keeping it simple, and trying to organize it, and then keep up with what's out there, what's on the table.
And there's likely more to come on April 2, but we'll get to that. Ken, when one of your clients talk to you, how do you even begin?
Well, it's like Sandy has mentioned, it is challenging. I think we have to really separate exporters from importers. Okay, and the Trump tariffs into the United States is on the import side. So importers are always getting fluxed around. Do I hold my shipments overseas? Do I bring them in? Do I advance them? Do I advance order? So in anticipation of all this noise, the trade deficit, I believe in January, was, I think, the biggest trade deficit that this country has ever seen. And that is because everybody heard the message, after the election. And so they rushed, and a lot of our clients, they started sending orders to China and saying, ship as much as you can, as fast as you can, before January 20th. And they did. Okay? And so now we're getting the fallout of that. Some of these shipments are on the water, right? Coming across, thinking that pre-announcements, but they're being changed, and Sandi's in the thick of it. So from an importer standpoint, they're really looking at what the product they're shipping, where it's coming from. Nobody really thought that Mexico and Canada would be slapped as much as the Trump tariffs are, because we have an agreement that he signed 5, 6 years ago, right? You would think he would, but it's not that way. China has always been on the so-called list, even under the Biden administration. And so if you're an importer, you're really looking at working with your customs brokers, trying to see. We have a client right now that has a manufacturing plant in Tijuana. They literally have 40 trucks on the Mexican border. And if that 12-hour window or 24-hour or one reprieve for 3 days, those 40 trucks are coming across the border. Okay, so they're really doing a lot of logistics and supply chain and what I would call gymnastics to do that. Right. On the exporter side, everybody's looking at, okay, what are going to be the countervailing tariffs and where is it going to come from? So if you're, let's say, sending exports to certain countries that are really not in the news, Taiwan, Korea, the Middle East, you're playing it kind of safe. But if you're sending something to China, you're really watching what is going to be the countervailing tariff coming the other way. Our European clients are very nervous. They're expecting some really tough tariffs. Our exporters that are selling to Europe are very nervous because they're expecting some really tough countervailing tariffs from the European Union and some of the other countries, let's say the EFTA countries as well. So they're very being guarded. They're telling their customers, buy now, don't wait, because if it actually comes through, prices are going to be up 20%, 25%. So there's an acceleration by European customers at the same time because they're fearful that there's going to be a countervailing tariff the other way.
Okay, again, you have a mic down there, Tim.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so Tim, you have deep history with Bucyrus and trips to China and all this, and there have been tariffs before and hints of trade wars before, but have you ever seen anything like this?
Probably not the way it's been done this time.
Okay. And what makes it different?
Well, we have a president that his first thrust is shock and awe. I mean, that's his style. With our president, you have to relax a little bit because it's going to change not in the next day but in the next hour. He moves quickly, but it's shock and awe initially, and then, quite frankly, at the end, it comes down to something that is manageable. But I think the thing that people forget, I was asked just last week, a reporter from Reuters called me, and he said, do you think we'll ever get free trade back again? And I said, free trade doesn't exist. Free trade's never existed. I said, you got to go back years and years and years, and tariffs are nothing new. This is a part of international business. And I was fortunate enough to be in international business for most of my career. 80% of my career is basically overseas. Tariffs are everywhere. And what's interesting about what's happened here in the last month is somebody said to me, you mean Europe has tariffs? I said, yeah. You mean India has tariffs of 200? Yeah. They've been out there for a long time. It's just no one talked about them. So free trade doesn't exist. It just doesn't. I think it's a concept that's kind of a misnomer in many respects. Having said that, I think that what will happen this time around, and again, you go back to his first administration, and I was running a corporation at that point in time, and we had the tariffs on China. China, my first visit was in 1985. The tallest building in Beijing was six floors tall, was a Beijing hotel. Everyone was in gray suits and bicycles. You look at where they're at today. I think what happened is their momentum built so strong and so large, and the fact that in his first term he felt he had to do something about it, and he did. We had to suffer through that. And his comment was exactly correct. There's going to be some pain and suffering. It's just a matter of how long. I would say that that first tranche of tariffs that were put in place this first administration, we suffered badly for about 6 months. It eased up for about 6 months, and we're almost back to normal in 12. Those tariffs are still in place. People forget that. Those tariffs were put in place in his first administration still exist. Now he's just kind of spreading it out, further, beyond just China and many other countries, and they've been out there for a long time.
Okay, Alexandra, so you talked about that, this is a topic in your classes, obviously. So how do you even begin to dissect all that's going on, because it's coming fast and furious? How do you set the template?
Well, we certainly started with the basics. What are the deleterious effects of a tariff? But what's amazing is this whole new layer, not only of the Trump administration's tariff policies, but the fluctuation of neighbor countries such as Canada. There was just an election in Mexico last year, and now we've seen Justin Trudeau resign after a short trip to Mar-a-Lago, and we have a new prime minister and an election on the way. Both Prime Minister Mark Carney and his contender Pierre Poilievre are adamant about helping Canada become more self-sufficient and reaching out to its neighbors. It's amazing how fast they've worked. For example, on the docket was to purchase 88 F-35s from the United States. Portugal dropped the contract. Canada's reviewing it. Mark Carney's not sure they're going to buy 88. And so you see rapid movement to readjust the supply chain based on new relationships. Another case in point that we've talked about is Justin Trudeau turned away Germany when they needed fuel the most during COVID. And so Germany, to its credit, acted very quickly to get LNG fuel. They moved it through the Baltic. It was amazing how fast they acted. Trudeau also turned away Japan. No oil or gas for you, and they have plenty of fuel up there. Now we're seeing a reversal of those policies. That's amazing. They're ready to sell LNG to Asia very quickly. Ports are already going up. And there's just a bolstering of national identity. And you see a lot of nervous tension among Canadians about where it's all going. So it is a fluid situation. And what I'm really enjoying about my classes is how awake you all are, how much you're watching the news, how curious you are, what's going to happen. And we're all watching. So I think this is made for the most interesting understanding of economics, the impact of policy, not only on the U.S.'s economy, but that of the world. And appreciating that we've got a complex global economy to navigate. So it's been real rewarding, and keep the questions coming. There's a space for you to do that this hour.
All right, I'm going to go to Tim on this first, and then everybody else chime in. Okay, again, you have this deep knowledge of China, and as you said, the tariffs on China aren't new, but they're changing. So, from your experience, is this necessary, and will the outcome actually change where manufacturing is done?
It already has. I think when the tariffs were put in place in this first administration, I think the initial reaction to the companies to the tariffs were that they started to try to find alternatives within the United States. And they found some. But that's not where they're getting their product from. They're getting it from Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. So it's like water. I always like the analogy of water. Water will find its way. If you put a dam here, water will find its way. People find their way. I mean, what's wonderful about the human race is we're very, very resourceful. So I think at the end of the day, I firmly believe that China adjusted. This is the other thing that people don't report. When those tariffs went up, do you think people stopped buying from China? No. What do you think the Chinese did? They dropped prices. They dropped prices because they could not have that kickback effect economically to those industries that were exporting to our country. So that's why I said the initial effects were really pretty rough the first 6 months. It took the Chinese suppliers a little bit of time to figure out where to price to keep supplying their customers here in the United States. It took some to find alternatives within the United States. And then over time, within a year to 18 months, they found other sources. So it's interesting. I think, that's why tariffs in international trade and everything else is very dynamic. But just keep in mind water. It'll find its least resistant way, and people who are resourceful, and they will find the product they need.
Okay, well, will there be true reshoring as some advocates of the tariffs say will happen? True reshoring back to the U.S.?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And that was the interesting part of the Reuters report that was here in Wisconsin last week. He was interviewing various manufacturers here in the state of Wisconsin, and it was interesting. Those that are very reliant on skilled labor said, it's not going to affect them whatsoever because they can't get the skilled labor. They're only going to ramp to a certain extent. Those that have modernized and really created, things like robotics in their plants and those type, they can ramp. And that was the feedback he was getting from the various manufacturers in Wisconsin. Those that have, kept up the pace of modernization of their plants here in Wisconsin, in our home base, they'll reap the benefits. And yes, the repatriation will happen. But it will be certain companies and certain industries that are not relying on skilled labor because, quite frankly, we still have a big problem here with skilled labor.
Okay. Well, Sandy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just share some anecdotal things from our customers. So, one of the things I would point out, the new duties on China are different than the original duties put in 2019, which were called the 301 duties, and it was under a particular regulatory rule, the Section 301, and that had to be by investigation that China was in violation of certain things, and they were implemented, and there was a waiting period and an investigation phase. The new duties, which are currently been placed on China, Canada, and Mexico, are under a rule called IEEPA, which is International Emergency Economic. It is an action that the president can take without any approval by Congress. He can do them quickly. He can do them with no notice, and under the pretense of emergency. So both Canada and, all three countries were based a lot on the fentanyl issue, and that was the emergency as well as some economic things. It's also the rule, if you will, the program that he wants to place duties on some of the other countries, and that is concerning to politicians, whether or not that's lawful, and the rest of the world is ready to argue that. But in regards to China, we had the original duty, which is anywhere from 7.5% to 25%, and still in effect. While there were some exclusions, all the exclusions are gone, expired. Now the new duties started at 10% a few weeks ago. They've gone up to 20%, and so that's 20% on top of the 25%. And what I can tell you anecdotally is when they first went in 2019, nobody thought they were going to stick, including me. And so most people didn't look around, do much, and they swallowed hard and they passed on the cost to the extent they could to you and I and all the rest of the consumers. In some cases, they negotiated lower pricing with their vendors in China, so China did absorb some of it. And then they started, as they stuck, as you will, over the 4 or 5 years, they started looking for other places to manufacture, like Vietnam, which we saw a huge shift. But you talk to companies. I've sat on panels with someone from Kohler. I've sat on different industries. It's not that easy to move your supply chain, and you spend millions of dollars building these factories, special tooling, and it's an enormous expense. So people, it's depending on your industry, it's just not that easy to do that or worth it. And even now with 45% on China, I have some customers telling me it's still cheaper than trying to source it here in the U.S. And that's the reality. And lastly, again, to the point of some industries, there are certain types of knitting and fabric work done that is only done there. There are certain looms, certain things that, a big textile, wearing apparel industry that's really, again, just hasn't been able to be, sourced elsewhere. So that, it will be a while for some of these things, and people are trying to figure out how to best navigate that and so forth. So, but it's hitting people hard, and, in the most part, I spend a lot of time talking to customers, especially now. Are you passing it on? How are you dealing with your pricing? Everybody has really changed how they price things to their customers or do any kind of quote or bid, and everything is subject to change more so than ever. We do big furniture companies that send out catalogs, and their pricing isn't in place, and obviously it's changing. Who wants 25% added overnight? And you said make decisions to shift. It was on the water. It was gone. And that's some of the chaos of how quickly some of these duties have been imposed. Customers didn't have an option. And for the first time in any tariff I have ever seen, there is no ability whatsoever to get a refund. You cannot export the goods. You cannot destroy the goods. You cannot do anything to ever get the money refunded. So a lot more restrictive than it's ever been.
Well, let's go with more on the reshoring and how the tariffs are passed along. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, so as far as I'm going to echo what Tim says, is that the first 301 tariffs that came through were a shock, because it was a big shock. And then over time, people are saying, okay, can I negotiate lower prices with our Chinese vendors? Some worked. Some of our clients, it worked. Many, it did not work. Another thing that the Chinese government did is they did, I believe, a 8 or 10% devaluation of the yuan. Okay, so that was advantage for domestic Chinese producers. Receiving dollars, they got more yuan to cover a higher so-called price in local currency. Some of our domestic, we had one domestic exporter here in Wisconsin who 100% almost, they are a steel and stainless steel fabricator. Well, when the tariffs came in 2019, the price of steel went up 25% immediately. So they tried to source additional steel from U.S. mills. Well, guess what? The price went up 25%. And so, yes, they tried to source it domestically, but quite frankly, it was the same price because business people are looking for increased revenue, right? So the domestic suppliers. And the second thing that happened with the domestic suppliers is they were put on allocation, which means that the domestic suppliers had so many customers, it exceeded their capacity. So they allocated X amount, like 80% to one client, 60%. So they could not get all the steel that they needed, all the stainless steel they needed. So all of a sudden they're doing substitutions, instead of 301 steel, they're doing 401. And at the end of the day, they had 3 price increases in 1 year, just to maintain a level of somewhat of a profitability. Now, we represented them on the export side, finding markets in Latin America and Middle East. And quite frankly, all those markets dried up. Why? Because their prices went up 40% in 1 year, where the, let's say, Mexican supplier could get that either locally or from China or Korea. So we lost market share during that time frame. Second thing is they didn't have enough supply, right? So I'll also echo is that this country doesn't really have the labor force to increase capacity quickly. At 4% unemployment, and now there's only 2 ways you could do that. Is that to automate or immigration? Well, immigration is off the table, so companies have to automate. And we're lucky because we have a European customer that is really looking at what they make is they program and design robotics manufacturing cells. They're really looking at the U.S. market. They just incorporated. Part of our job is to find them space, so that they can go after customers, come up with a customer list. We're going after Caterpillar, Kabuza, all these guys. They're really interested in developing it. So from that standpoint, the reshoring is going to work because it's going to be automated, right?
But it's going to take a while.
It's going to take a couple of years. In every single project that they do, it's going to be 18 to 24 months.
Okay, so Alexandra, let me ask you, or does anybody here disagree that tariffs at the end of the day are going to increase prices? Because Ken just cited what happened the last time. Is there any reason to believe that they won't increase prices?
No, I think it's proven that they can increase prices. But again, I think it normalizes over time. And that's the big one little anecdote, and I just read that this morning, that I did not even know about. I don't know if you guys had seen that or not. The population in the state of Wisconsin over the last 2 years has increased 24% over the last 2 years, each year. And it was all immigrants, international immigrants. And, it's obviously, border related, that sort of thing. What's also interesting about it, they're not here. They're basically in the western part, northwestern part of the state, which is, agricultural and manufacturing related. So that influx of labor may change what we're saying about as far as the labor situation in the state as well, to some extent.
Okay, Alexandra, what about, let's try to track the effects on, Wisconsin industries, Wisconsin farmers, Midwest industries. If there is an all-out trade war, how does Wisconsin and the Midwest fare and all that?
I'm going to go a little tangent to get back to the answer.
Okay.
One of the things.
Well, you're an instructor. You can do whatever you
Okay, so now you're going to play. Let's go into the world of theory. This is a dangerous question. Is a trade imbalance even bad? I'm not going to try and answer it. Is it really bad? Why do nations trade? Why do nations trade?
Because when they have an advantage in something, they can sell it. If they're less advantage in something that a company wants or a nation wants.
So we don't trade bananas because we don't have a comparative advantage. It's going to be really hard to build a whole bunch of hothouses that grow bananas and that we could trade, right? So here's scale is what I'm getting at. Wisconsin makes more dairy products than all of Canada. And Canada only has 8% of the population of the United States. So the question is, why drive a perfect balance of trade volume and dollars between nations? So some things might be surprising. Maybe you've heard some of the provinces, the premiers from the provinces speak quite differently. They're like the governors of states. So while, for example, a partner like Canada with only 41 million people as opposed to over 300 million here is in straits, is because they say it, we catch a cold here, they get the flu. So little things, bumps in this economy can drastically affect the Canadian. So, for example, they have a highly protected dairy industry, which was a big point of contention with the USMCA, was renegotiated. Flat out, Canada wants to protect its dairy industry for food security. So they have a very rigid supply chain management system where they have quotas of production, which result in the prices that they set as a goal. That's actually a marketing group that does that. And their whole philosophy about how the economy should run is based on their perspective of the government and what it can and should do. So, for example, you can hear it in the national documents of each country. Someone finished a sentence for me. In the United States, you want to pursue life, liberty, and? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Here's the difference. In Canada, it's peace, order, and good government. You hear the difference? So more Canadians are likely to see the government as an agent of their well-being. You see it in the free health care, which is that's just not true. It's through the tax system, believe me. The taxes are very high up there. But, so that brings us back to the question about Wisconsin. Wisconsin has an unusual ability to supply the dairy needs of Canada at the expense of knocking the dairy industry out of business or making a severe cut into it. If their market dynamics and supply chains work the way they do here, and they don't. So a lot of it is about preservation, and then you hear the differences. For example, Smith in Alberta, the premier, is like, let's trade. Look at the USMCA. 97% of all trade is tariff-free. So I believe that what President Trump is trying to do is not talk about, he's trying to talk about fair trade, unsubsidized goods should be flowing, not subsidized good where the government supports the industry, props it up, and then you have this odd pricing policy. So I think that Wisconsin's in great shape, like you heard. It's got an immigration that assists the labor force issue into a greater productivity, and we really can't tell what's going to happen. We have to watch what happens up north. We have to watch what happens in Mexico. Diplomatic relations are tightening with the old country. For example, Canada is making overtures to England and the rest of Europe and now Asia. So I think Wisconsin's a strong player, and we have, you see Canada at the top. It's back in import place #1, and then Mexico and China. I think you're in the epicenter of a lot of events because manufacturing's here, and I think it's exciting in a way we didn't anticipate. I agree with Tim. I think the initial bump is going to be painful, and like water, folks are going to be seeking new markets where they can get the best price. Some things won't work. Some things are easy. For example, businesses are already moving closer to the border if they're not coming in. And actually, billions of dollars are coming into the United States to produce here. So now we need the labor.
Is USMCA still in effect?
Yes.
Yeah.
How do we know that? Because, aren't all these new tariffs, threats of tariffs, upsetting that?
Yes, but then that was part of the backtrack. So I was going to make a couple of comments. I mean, to the economic impact, even President Trump was quoted saying, there will be pain, it will, increase inflation in the short term, but his long-term vision is, again, that it'll settle down. And yes, in regards to our trade agreements with Canada, the initial IEPA, this emergency duty, went into effect and shut down USMCA. Didn't matter, and not honoring that, which, by the way, then there was already threat that, we're going to fight that because that's against the trade agreement and go to the World Trade Organization. Then there were conversations both with President Sheinbaum and with Trudeau, and backpedaled, and then, I have the dates, but within, a couple weeks then changed it and said, okay, we'll carve out for USMCA. Well, I should back up. To just give you an idea of the volatility, we put the Chinese tariffs in effect. They were in effect a few days. Then we said, no, we won't do it, and we paused it for 30 days, and then they went back into effect. But then we did a carve-out for USMCA and said, we will honor USMCA. So if you qualify for USMCA, those goods are still duty-free, but everything else has the duties implemented. China has already, as of February, implemented retaliatory tariffs. In terms of Wisconsin, it's a lot on agriculture, some dairy products, beef, things like that, and then food, beverages, beer, wine, various carve-outs. So, the thing, when you talk about long-term shifting, moving goods, the professed strategy and challenge that everybody has in decision-making is, are these going to be long-term? And again, even the president has said, it's a tool. It's a tool. We all know he likes a little drama and is trying to get a reaction. And we saw it back in 2019 with the China tariffs, and there was, as people said, tit for tat, and then China did this, and we did that, and we had 4 tranches, and, landed where we did, and then nobody backpedaled, including President Biden. And the same thing is happening now. Canada's standing strong, Mexico is standing strong and fighting back, and, all of Europe is ready to fight back if we,
let's explain what might happen on April 2nd, the reciprocal tariffs. Every country in the world is going to get a number, according to the administration, get a number as to what they'll be assessed.
Right. So, article today with more detail, but, still fuzzy on the detail, but professed, President Trump was quoted, this is the big one, or Liberation Day, that there will be a economic measurement of what is our trade imbalance with that particular country and some sort of formula established based on how much we import their goods versus what they buy and what the duty rates are. So to everyone's point, yes, there are really high duties in some countries. It's not always duties, it's often the VAT that gets added. And a lot of countries have much higher taxes than we do. So comparing it to that, that U.S. products are that much more expensive, sold overseas versus our importing foreign goods, and he wants to equalize that. If you, for instance, charge 30% on a U.S. product, that's what we're going to charge. And, just try to level the playing field, so to speak. But in the quote, it even says, we'll figure out a formula and a number for each country based on what our, trade imbalance or balance is. And then, unless you negotiate and make a deal in advance, that's going to happen. So again, using it as a tool.
That's something new. Does that make any of you nervous, this idea that, that's a new thing? A lot of these duties and tariffs are in existence, but to have a so-called reciprocal tariff on everything, does that make you nervous, Ken, or your clients nervous?
Well, yeah, it's going to, one thing about business people is that we like certainty. We can like certainty, and then we can plan, and then we can execute. This type of, hey, what's the formula going to be on a certain date, has no certainty whatsoever. So from a business perspective, you get kind of paralyzed. What should I do? Should I wait? Do I move? Do I lower my price? Do I talk to my customers? Do I negotiate? Do I import? And so it's a very fluxing problem for every business person and every consumer. Because every consumer is like, do I buy today? Because it's going to be X amount more tomorrow.
Yeah, should I buy my French wine now?
Exactly.
The answer is
Of course. Oh, yeah.
So
Okay,
the answer is yeah. So, your local liquor store is going to be out of French wine probably tomorrow. So, yes, it is very fluxing. And I don't know if nervous. Tim, we've been in business a long time. We've seen these type of shocks. So I think what it is we really are paralyzed exactly the right way to move. I'm going to address, what's the long-term effect. The long-term effect is once prices are raised, usually businesses don't like to lower prices.
They only go one direction.
Yeah, they only go one direction, unless there's competitive forces. The competitive forces are if they open up the markets again to, say, foreign competitors. So if the tariffs are in and they stay, the long-term effect is that prices are going to stay at an elevated rate.
Okay, Tim, why don't you, before we go to questions, go ahead.
As a recovering CEO, I can say this now. I'm sure if I was still in the seat, I'd have a different answer. But we're so focused in business in the United States of America in the short-term quarterly reports. We're compensated annually very handsomely by hitting certain targets and things like that. I know, speaking with ex-colleagues of mine on that sort of thing, the business community is not happy. And it's primarily for many reasons, though. Obviously, as you said, Ken, we like certainty. We like to plan. If you're a public company, you got to come out quarterly and tell your shareholders how you're going to perform, and not only this quarter, but for the year, and so forth and so on. Trump is playing the long game, and the long game, though, is finite. He's got 4 years, and the thing about him, and again, you got to strip away the shock and awe, the bombastic, behavior and that sort of thing. He's got good advisors, and he's not a dumb man. He felt, I think, the thing that, with the national debt the way it was, with the imbalance of trade the way it was, he's going after a very large picture that he wants to solve in 4 years. And that's why he's been pretty careful about saying this is going to be some short-term pain and suffering, a little bit of pain and suffering. And it's right, it will be. It could be 6 months, it could be a year. But quite frankly, I have faith, based on really the plan that's being put in place, he's calling attention to an imbalance. The imbalance is the fact that we've got a horrible, debt situation. We have a horrible balance of trade situation. He's going to address those things, and he's doing it in some very unconventional and very dramatic ways. But when we come back here in another year, we'll all be sitting here going, why are we even talking about this stuff? I mean, it's all been resolved. It won't be necessarily, but I guess what I'm saying is, you're on a 4-year plan. We're in the first 2 months of shock and awe. It will kind of level itself out, and I think the business community, and you've already seen it in the investment community. The investment community, they're starting to relax a little bit, and they need to relax a lot more. Things will be fine.
Hey, Sandy, did you hear that? In a year, we won't have anything to talk about.
Okay, let's go to the questions out here. Raise your hand, I'll call on you and ask a question. And I think to get as many questions as possible, maybe just one of you will answer the question as best as possible. And then I'll have a closing question. Go ahead. Yeah, you're on.
My question is that I read online when President Trump put in place these tariffs that it was going to kind of incentivize foreign companies that have these tariffs to kind of come into the United States and create their companies there, which again would create jobs and help boost the economy. Have you guys seen that happening yet? Or
Have you seen any foreign companies either promising or moving to the U.S. because of these threats or the tariffs?
Yeah, I'll just briefly. I think the news talks about a lot of plans. And I know our president and governors and economic development individual government officials really like, hey, so-and-so committed X amount billions coming in. I'm always weary of that. Having a public announcement that we're going to commit so much, it's up to the actual business to actually execute that sometime in the future. And that's based on if it's going to be profitable and you get your return on your investment. So, yes, it sounds great, but there's a lot of projects. I think one of the famous ones here is Foxconn that did not happen. And because of tariffs. Okay, so I would kind of sift through all that public noise and see if the reality actually comes around.
Right. Some of those promises are made to make the administration feel good too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Just a quick one. Somebody's going to write a book on Foxconn because
I think somebody already did. But
but there's going to be
a better one. All right.
There's a better book because there's a backstory that's really interesting. I think at the end of the day, look, it all comes down to dollars and cents. No matter what it is in business, trust me, it all comes down to money. And I think that a lot of the manufacturers from overseas, especially the automobile manufacturers, are moving here not necessarily, for this reason or that reason. They're coming here because they have infrastructure they can put in place and to get a product from point A to point B, whether it be Honda or Kia or somebody else, they're going to come here for long-run type of economic advantage. And I don't think, I purposely don't really think that the tariffs are going to drive a longer-term type investment decision like that.
Okay, right here.
All
Shout
right.
it out.
So, hi, Professor Sielaff, first of all. Secondly, I'm not sure if this is necessarily the question to ask here, but I'll ask it anyway because we talked a lot about reshoring. Do we think we can handle it? Because this was something I looked into as part of Professor Sielaff's class, was specifically how tariffs would affect our energy. And we already can't handle what we have now, and a lot of our transformers are reaching the end of their lifespans. With the tariffs on steel and aluminum, that's going to make these things even more costly to produce. So with the influx we're expecting to see in reshoring, do we really think we can handle it, especially since you also talked about automation?
Right.
So
does the U.S. have the infrastructure to handle a lot of reshoring?
Yeah, let me answer that question because we just had the Champions of Industry 2 weeks ago. Aaron Yockfeld was our guest, and he's a literal expert on the grid. And the answer to your question is no, the grid cannot handle it. But if you look at it regionally, certain regional electric companies are handling it, quite famously. So, Gail Clappa, who runs We Energies here in Wisconsin, one data center. And we've got 6 that are going up in southeastern Wisconsin. One data center is the equivalent power to power 200 homes. Now think about that. We got 6 coming into southeastern Wisconsin. So he's got to figure out how to generate that power. It's going to be more regional, and then it's going to be, I think, wholesale national. We can't do things nationally very well. But I think over time, I think we'll solve for that. And there's new technologies coming out on the nuclear side that Aaron talked about that were pretty interesting.
Did you say 200 homes?
200, or is it more?
I thought it was 200,000.
I thought it's 200,000.
Yeah, I was off a little bit.
I mean, 200 homes. I mean, that's a couple solar panels.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that one.
Okay, right here in the red.
So I'm just curious. So when Trump used this tariff, I think it's like more of a bargaining chip. Things he wanted, it was going in his direction, and then he did impose it. Then he finally imposed it, and so now the other countries are imposing tariffs on our stuff. So I'm just thinking, like when we talk about the trade deficit in the service sector, we aren't in a trade deficit thing. So if they're going to start imposing tariffs on that sector for U.S., is there any other countries that can actually benefit from this whole situation of trade wars?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say, this is where it's hard in the short term, to see anyone benefiting in the U.S. I'll just say. So I've seen it, these tremendous duties that have been placed on importing goods from all countries, and steel and aluminum, China, Mexico, and Canada in particular, raising their costs, some people putting out of business, so certainly not helping them. And then because our U.S. exporters and manufacturers need raw material of different kinds, steel and aluminum in particular, that's been one of the recent, Trump initiatives, is 25% on all steel and aluminum, all products that contain steel and aluminum, down to the most minute content. So it is now making our exported U.S. manufactured goods so much more expensive. I had 2 customers this week who were selling products in the millions of dollars. One is a very high-tech, oversized crane, and another one that does some digital machinery, and they both lost the bid because their pricing was increased by the steel and aluminum inputs. One of them is actually now looking to have their product manufactured in Canada to make it a product of Canada, so when they sell it to Europe, it won't have the U.S. tariffs that have been imposed, in Europe in retaliation. So it's been contrary to the, try to boost our U.S. economy, manufacturing, et cetera, because it just keeps going back and forth.
Okay, Alexandra, you want to chime in here?
Well, I'd like to add to that, Amela. It's exactly what Tim said. Water will flow where it can go. So, for example, with the Chinese deal phase 1 in 2020, China had to agree to take $200 billion of goods to offset the trade balance. And what did they do? They went to the European Union and other ASEAN countries around them, so that water flowed to where it could go. I have to make a plug. When all of these trade actions started, we were just at the beginning of the course, and I warned you to go out and get your Tim Hortons because the shelves were emptying in 2 days. But I do want you to know I have a box this big. I have 40 decafs and 1 calf. What am I going to do with that box if you really love the coffee? I'm going to sell it for $70 a box. You can have our Canadian coffee. So this is how markets react. They react like individuals seeking to survive.
Just one more comment on that, is that the stock markets in Europe are up 10%. So the Europeans are saying, well, if my prices I can't sell to the United States because I'm not going to be price competitive, the U.S. importers are going to stop buying. I have to find markets. So they're actually looking elsewhere for their markets. and they're being extremely competitive in those particular markets. So, the whole competitive advantage shifts.
Chaos creates opportunity.
It does.
The biggest gains I ever made as a CEO was when chaos occurred. And we always, our whole saying was, never squander a good crisis.
Yeah, but maybe hedge funds are going to make out better than anybody, right? Okay, other questions? You had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about how we apparently have this lack of skilled labor in the United States, and I'd like to get some of your thoughts on what are the components of this skilled labor, because I don't want to just leave and say that there's a lack of motivation or something like that. If people will learn the skills, they will learn the skills, and it seems like jobs for the most part have outsourced this to schools, to different vocations that essentially train people to do on-the-job stuff. So how do we even address this idea of lack of skilled labor in the United States?
I know a guy that wrote a report about it back in 2012. It's still very pertinent. It's called The Road Ahead. I think the guy's name was Sullivan. Unfortunately, it's still pertinent. If you look at the state of Wisconsin, and if you look at our industries, we are the #1 manufacturing state on a per capita basis in the country. Milwaukee's the #2 manufacturing city in the country in manufacturing. San Jose passed us up about 4 or 5 years ago. If you would remove the Hispanic population from the state of Wisconsin, this is fact, we would lose 25% of our manufacturing capability, and we would lose virtually every dairy farm. That's how important it is to make sure that we manage immigration. So if you go back in history, the immigrants have always done the tough jobs. They've always done the manufacturing type jobs. Whether it was the Irish, the Italians, the Germans, the Polish. In the city of Milwaukee, the manufacturing started here because of the Polish and German immigrants that we had. Without immigration right now in our country, we will not be able to manufacture. And so it really, it's really unfortunate how everything's unfolded here in the recent past, because things got way out of whack. Our population is up in the state by 24%. It was huge, 2 years in a row. And quite frankly, it's beat the people that came across the border. We got to get them trained. The ones that are legal, they're not legal. But we'll figure out how to keep who we can keep and get them into our workforce. Because that's our workforce here in the state of Wisconsin. And that's, quite frankly, our workforce across the United States of America.
Actually, there's 2 individuals in this room that know that answer very well. Buckley and Chris, who are from the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing. So, as Tim says, you got to have the person. Then you have to have the school, the instructors, and the facilities. And then at the same time, you have to have the individuals that want to learn those technical skills. So we call it a shortage of labor, but we really don't have enough technical schools. And in the high schools, we're not really, there's a lot of, how do I say, gravitation to non-tech or non-manual jobs, right? I mean, it's easy. You get sick, go to urgent care, you see a doctor right away. You try to get a plumber, 2 weeks. You go to the car, mechanic, well, maybe I can get you next Thursday, right? So I think it's a multifaceted point, but it starts with, like Tim says, you got to have the person.
You got to have the person. Let me just say 2 things. First of all, 70% of the jobs in the state of Wisconsin, because we're so heavily manufacturing and dairy farm related, do not require what we do here at Carroll University. They don't. You can literally, with some training, get onto a manufacturing floor or work on a dairy farm. Here's the other dirty little secret in the state of Wisconsin. We have a massive shortage of engineers. We need engineers desperately. Here's one for you. We have a shortage of accountants here in Wisconsin. The #1 demand here in Waukesha County are accountants. So those of you that are in accounting, you're in good shape. And how did that happen? Well, because they raised the credit requirement to 150 from 120. And people don't go into the profession anymore. We figured out how to manage that. So it takes everything. But it really, it's a knock-on effect. The good news about the state of Wisconsin, the fact that we are manufacturing creates a very, very, very strong base for the future of economic growth. 90% of the companies here in Waukesha County said that they are going to grow in 2025 if they can get the labor and they get the engineers and the people that count the money.
Okay. Sorry. So we're running out of time, but I want to close with this, ask all of you this question. So beginning with you, Alexandra. So the term trade war was brought up. Are we in a trade war with the rest of the world, and is that a good thing?
Yes, we're in a trade war, and the water will flow where it goes, and it'll calm down. I do agree with Tim on that.
I guess you can call it a trade war. I said there's no such thing as free trade. I think that's absolutely true. We've always had tariffs. They've been out there for many, many years. This thing will find its medium and relax, I think, over time. But yeah, it's a trade war for the time.
I would agree. We are in a trade war. We don't have time. We're running out of time. But this whole globalization that happened over the last 40 years has increased the standard of living in every country to the point where we are very wealthy as a country. Okay, despite the trade deficits and all the deficits, from a consumer, our standard of living is increased greatly because of globalization. And so, I personally am somewhat of a free trader. It's got to be fair trade, but trade is good, right? And anything that inhibits that has to have a specific reason for it. And what I'm personally seeing is a nationalism type of a trade war. And typically, at the end of the day, and you can go through economic history for thousands of years. When a trading city like Damascus closes its borders, the people inside the city actually are the ones that suffer the most, right? So it's going to work out. Businesses are very flexible. The water will find its way. Prices are going to stay where they are. And at the end of the day, life goes on.
I'll agree with most of the comments. Yes, we are definitely in a trade war. I've seen several. I've seen banana wars. I've seen specific wars. There's been some very interesting ones in the decades I've been doing this. I share one of the comments, earlier by the professor, and is imbalanced trade a bad thing? And, you do what you're good at and comparative advantage and so forth. So, it speaks to our, someone said we should take down the Statue of Liberty because our values have changed. But the point is, we've promoted free trade. It's the best way to help a country. Teach a man to fish, right? And you invest in, how can you help them become more independent? And that has been our philosophy for many years. Our original trade with Canada and Mexico under NAFTA, before USMCA, was to be a North American and take advantage of each other's strengths, to be a entity much like the European Union was in dealing with the global economy, to be stronger and better, and we complemented each other as opposed to fighting each other. So I'm very much an advocate of trade. A little bit, if you read the America First policy and some of the philosophy of, make it in America, build it in America, is a lot like the China's plan, but China's a dictatorship, and China is trying to build in China for China and be self-reliant, within the next decade, which, again, a little bit of a different political arena and so forth. So, yes, we will survive. I fear some of the casualties along the way, and, small companies, and that's what's hard for me to watch, and, consumers and so forth. And but I will say, there seems to be some momentum in people speaking up. There is opportunity in some of these proposed trade laws to, open for comment to the public. So it's becoming a little less of go it alone and make decisions. So I think there's some balance in the power there ahead.
Okay. Thank you, panel. Hold on with your applause, please. We want to thank the sponsors, Michael Best Strategies, Carroll University, of course, Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity, the Center for East Asian Studies, and again, thank you to the Carroll University staff. Thank you, Alexandra, Tim, Ken, and Sandi. And thanks to all of you. We have a free reception to follow in the hall outside. Thanks very much for attending. Let's give a round of applause to the panel.
You've been listening to Talking Trade with Sandi Siegel and Ken Wasylik, sponsored by the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity, Michael Best Strategies, and Carroll University.